Today, there are 2 million descendants of French-Canadian immigrants living in New England. These are our stories. Welcome to the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast.
Venez tous jeunes filles et garçons, je vais vous raconter l'histoire de notre immigration ici au USA, de grands aventuriers de pays étrangers.
This is the French-Canadian Legacy Podcast. I am Jesse Martineau, and joining me, a little introduction to this special episode, producer extraordinaire Mike Campbell. Mike, how you doing, sir?
Good. Thanks for having me, Jesse.
So we decided we're going to do something a little bit different for the 1-year anniversary of the show, because we did start in March of 2019 is when we actually released our first episode. We had recorded a bit before then. So we're doing a little bit something different. But before we get going, I think it's probably cool that we do some thank yous. So just a giant thank you again. We had no idea what we were getting into when we started this process a year ago. So we really appreciate everybody checking us out.
Like we say in the interviews coming up, we couldn't imagine the outreach we've heard from people, just people enjoying it as much as we enjoy it. We thought it was just like a passion project at first, but it really caught on, and we appreciate everyone that listens. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, so this is cool. So we're going to do a couple different things with this episode. We're going to feature clips from 2 separate interviews. You'll be able to catch both interviews in their entirety on our Patreon. Is that correct, Mike?
Yes. So both of these interviews were about an hour long, and we didn't want to throw out a 2-hour episode
Sure.
because I'm going to be honest with you, 15 minutes of one interview is just about the Boston Red Sox.
There you go, of course.
So if you're a big Boston Red Sox fan, check out our Patreon. Tomorrow, both of the interviews in their entirety will be available there.
All right, very cool. For the very first interview we are going to air, we had a really neat opportunity. Myself, Mike, and actually my sister Monique had the chance to sit down and be interviewed by the filmmaker, Tonya Shevenell. Now, we talked about her movie, one of our very first episodes, The Home Road. Tremendous documentary. She's a super talented, really amazing person. And she offered to interview us. So I thought that'd be kind of neat. So these clips, you'll hear the 3 voices, myself, Mike, and my sister Monique, kind of talk a little bit about where we are and how we came up with this idea for this podcast.
When you think about the roots and the different parts and sides of your family, do you remember how you started learning about I'm French Canadian, or I'm French, or I'm the other parts that you all are? Do you have recollections on how that came around?
I'll go first on
Sure.
this one. When we interviewed Susan Panette, she talked about how a lot of her students learn that their traditions that they did at their home wasn't unique to themselves, that it's French Canadian stuff that was happening. And I feel like I'm exactly that with this podcast. Jesse has talked to numerous people, and I was like, wait, what? That's what my family did. And so it wasn't as present as you'll hear from Jesse and Monique in a few minutes, but I'm learning a lot of the stuff they didn't announce or talk about very much.
I think growing up, we were very cognizant of it. Even I can remember in grammar school, in kindergarten, we were learning French, and there were kids in class with me who were bilingual. So I think that's something, and having grandparents, our memes and pepes, both sides would talk in French in front of us when they didn't want us to understand. And it would be one of those things like, come on, So I think we were very aware of being French Canadian, having gone to French Canadian churches, the French Canadian events, our parents speaking French around us, the jokes now, even like the lullabies, which still carry on. I sing to my son now. Like, we still know some that still carry on. And then my name is Monique. Again, I couldn't run from being French Canadian.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. There was never a time where it wasn't there for me. Kind of same deal. Baptized into, at the time, at least in Manchester, I think a lot of places they had national churches, which were set aside very specifically for an ethnic group. And we were both baptized in a French church. And that French church played a huge role in my grandparents' lives. Like Monique was saying, they very much spoke French to each other all the time, forever. Both my parents spoke French at the house growing up. So I don't think there was ever a time where I was not aware of that French side. And I think a lot of that, which makes our story probably less complicated than a number of others, including some of the people I work with at the Franco-American Center, is that, at least to my knowledge, we don't have another side. Like we can share, like
Right.
all 4 grandparents go back to Quebec. I can
Wow.
tell you the town that all 4 branches of my grandparents' families come from, like in Quebec. I've been to all of them. So there isn't like a, we have
Mixed breed.
We have
No.
we don't have like well then there's the Irish aunts or
Right.
then there's the Polish aunts. Like for us it was always French.
When you think of the things that make you French Canadian, or like the artifacts that you grew up with, or the traditions in your households, are there stories or traditions or things like that, or certain people that really to you help you identify with your heritage?
I mean, for me, it was always my grandparents in that generation was always the big thing when I was growing up, for sure. Because we talk about a lot on our podcast about the survivance. The whole idea is you have to keep the traditions, you have to keep the language, you have to keep the faith. And all 3 were a really, really, really big deal to my grandparents, for sure. Like, you walked anywhere in their house, you're going to see crucifixes all over the place. And it is, obviously it's a Catholic tradition, but I don't think they saw Catholic and French as indivisible. It was like, that was like, I remember my dad made the joke once that when the church that he grew up in had the very first English mass, it was like, because he was still a kid, he remembers it. It was like news to him that God could speak English. It was like it was just because everything church related had always been in French.
Wow.
Like you couldn't have church without French. You couldn't have French without the influence of a priest who taught you how to live your life, the French life. So they always lived right to the very end, surrounded by that their entire lives. So we had the tradition. We had the pork pie at all of our
Still
families.
do.
Same here with my grandma. She would always make pork pie for Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Yep. We still have it.
We still have it around for sure. Still, we go to the midnight mass. It was a
Yeah.
big deal for the Frenchies. So I mean, that's still something that happens. But again, it is fascinating because you don't realize, like similar to what Mike was saying, you kind of don't realize a lot of it was so much tradition of your heritage until you're almost taking a step back and looking at it. It was just what we had. It was just what was life growing up.
My I don't know, silliest thing was in an earlier interview, someone said "matount."
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course, I'm butchering the pronunciation,
Matount, yeah.
but I thought my aunt's name was Matount Dot. That was how we referred to her, was Matount Dot, and I had never heard that anywhere else. So I just thought, and then I was like, wait, what? Because I don't speak a lick of French. I took German and Spanish in high school, so I didn't know that at all. And
Yeah,
it's just
it's funny because my godmother is Matount Monique, and one thing that I've been a stickler about my sister's kid is that he's gonna grow up calling me Monique. That's a big deal to me. I'm gonna be Monique Jesse.
my mom has my son refer to her as Meme,
There you go.
and my wife's mom is Grandma.
Yeah,
So grandma and grandpa, and then
that's
Meme.
what she does on her.
Yeah, we have my son has Meme and a Pepe, and then grandmas and grandpas. But I think the biggest thing for us, it was just we joke and call it like franglais, but there was like that, like growing up, that there was sometimes it was like intermingled, like at Christmas parties, like people would yell out like, oh, cadeaux, where are the cadeaux?
Yeah, that's right.
Just things like that were
Cadeaux,
always
yeah.
that were always the culture was
gifts.
Yeah, it means gifts. Sorry. So yeah.
Thank you.
You're
Merci.
yeah. No, and like again, it's just, it was how we grew up. So I can't say there was necessarily, like, I think I definitely associate that generation because they were, though our parents are bilingual, it was so so prevalent in that generation. They spoke French every day, and it definitely defined them. And obviously the Catholic Church played a huge role in all of that. Because I think even like, side note too, like I think even on like the female side a little bit more, like I think we grew up with a love of dance and stuff like that also came from that. That came from like, they would have these like parties
Sure.
in their houses like this, where they would move furniture and they would dance on the floors. And then that was really pushed upon the girls, I think, more than anyone else, that was a big part of who we were. That's what I still do. But like,
It's what my mom does.
Is my
what
mom,
Monique
my
does.
aunt,
Absolutely.
like
Still, yeah.
Still. So I think that the love of the music and the fact that you have good rhythm, all of that tied into the fact that they would do these little parties where
The soiree.
where they would like clear out a living room and dance and play music. And my mom remembers dancing to the quadrilles. So I think all of that is a big part of who. And again, it was just I took dance, like it was intermingled in my life, but it was a big deal to my family that I was good at it.
Wow. Do you have any of the music or the dances in part of your family
No,
story?
not really. No. Nothing like that at all. So it was mostly my grandma, or my meme.
Sure.
She passed when I was a sophomore in high school, but we'd go to mass with her every Sunday at 8 a.m. Sometimes we'd go to the French mass, and I'd be like, they found a way to make church even more fun. Because I don't understand anything now.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, we didn't. It was mostly when my mom would be mad at me, I'd hear her and Meme talking in French, so I knew something was wrong. I did something wrong. So, but no, we didn't really have anything like that.
It's funny.
Yeah.
Well, and just thinking, Mike and Monique both have children. And as you two think about how to talk to your kids about their heritage and their roots and what that means and things, well, actually, before we get to that, can you just tell us a little bit about your kids?
Well, Bryce is my son, and he's the assistant editor of this podcast.
He is indeed.
So a lot of this stuff you don't hear is thanks to Bryce's great decisions.
Cut, edit.
Yeah, there you go. He sees Jesse and I working on the podcast, so he's been starting to get really interested in microphones and stuff. He's 4, just started. He's in pre-K now, and I haven't really thought about this that much, honestly. We have Meme. He hears that. I put some shows on in French just because we're trying to enforce other languages in him. I don't speak another language, and I really want him to learn 1 or 2 languages because, I don't know, I just think it would be very awesome to speak another language and be able to go somewhere else and know what you're doing. But I honestly haven't thought that much about it, other than just the meme. He's asked about like meme, the difference between meme and grandma. He's asked about that, but
What did you tell him? I'm curious.
I just told him that meme had a meme and I had a meme, and that's just how it was basically. Like,
That's cool.
So I think so. I have a son. He's 8 months old, and his name is Bernard actually. So he goes by Ben Bernard because that's my dad's name.
Okay.
So we named him Bernard Alexander, and his last name is Carnes. So it's a Scottish last name. And being female, knowing my identity, my whole name is who I was my French Canadian legacy truly. Mm-hmm. So I knew giving that up, I wanted to keep something for him to hold on to. So that was a big factor in why we named him Bernard. Obviously, and my dad is a phenomenal role model, so it was really important for that. And it is really, I think, obviously my brother did a podcast about this, so it's pretty important to our family to keep that legacy going. So he's 8 months, so I don't know how much he knows right now, but he has a meme, he has a pepe, he's a mononcle. I think the other part is, like I already said, and we sing to him in French from what I remember.
Mom always does.
Yeah, my mom, when she comes up as meme, she always speaks to him in French. And that happened to Jesse and I as well, and we didn't retain it. But I'm hoping, whether he picks up the language or not, at least he knows where he comes from. Because no matter what your background is, I think it's important to know who you are, and who you are is, your roots. So that's kind of where we went with that.
I don't think Ben's gonna be able to get away from it, to be honest with you.
No, he's probably surrounded by it, and luckily his father's pretty cool with letting us go to he doesn't care about going to Poutine Fest or going to Quebec with us, So he's not French Canadian at all. He does have actually roots to France, but my husband's got no French Canadian, but he's pretty cool with Ben knowing where he's from.
I thought it might be fun for listeners to get to know just a few little things about their hosts, and Monique for sure jump into all this stuff like that. So I'm gonna toss you guys some softballs.
All right. Oh, here
All
we
right.
go.
What's your favorite color?
Blue.
Black.
Since when?
Black.
It was like yellow growing up.
I liked yellow. Sure. I like black.
Yellow, black.
Black.
That's new, everybody. That's a recent development in Jesse's life.
All right, that might be another episode.
Sure.
Like, right, talking about the shadows and Jesse's life and the darkness and the black. Monique, do you have a favorite color?
Oh, let's go. I'll go blue as well.
Okay. All right.
Team blue.
That's right.
All right. How about well, speaking about places and destinations, like favorite vacation you ever took or spot or places you just maybe like to go to relax or something?
Mine is York, Maine.
I was gonna say I know Mike's answer big time on this
the
one.
whole trip up here. My family, we had a cottage in York, Maine near Nubble Light, if you know the area, and we just sold it last year because the other half of my family, I owned half of it, and then a couple of uncles owned the other half, and they wanted out because they have family moving to like DC and other areas, so they weren't coming up as much as we were, and we couldn't afford to buy it out. So, but every summer, all August, they would rent out the cottage in June and July, and then we would just spend all of August in York.
That's
and
awesome.
so it's my favorite. I think it's probably my favorite place. Top 2, top 3. I love theater. I don't love New York City, like Times Square, like all the people, but I love going to see shows there.
What were some of your favorite shows or
The musical Rent is my favorite show.
I need that kind of culture. I've got to do that.
You're curious about musical theater. You need to have a chat with Mike.
Yeah, if you have any
Mike knows
questions.
his musical theater big time.
Yeah, Rent's my favorite show. Les Mis,
Mm-hmm.
the French tie-in kind of.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
I've listened to it in French. I like listening to musicals in other languages. Just stuff you know so well, hearing it in a different way, I think is really cool.
That is cool.
Favorite trips? Well, we've done a couple big family ones. I've been pretty lucky about that. Probably we went to France. So that was pretty crazy. So we went to Paris and Normandy. We were on the significance of that was cool. My grandfather actually was on Omaha Beach on D-Day, so we got to be there. Jesse, my family, my parents and Jesse and I got to stand on Omaha Beach where he was. That was eye-opening. We had fun. We went to Ireland. That was a good time too. I really enjoyed being in Ireland. That was a fun trip.
What part of Ireland?
We went all over. We went to Cork. We went to Galway. That was my favorite for sure. Was Galway.
Because of dancing and
No,
music?
we going to the Cliffs of Moher.
Beautiful, yeah.
It's gorgeous there.
Well, because I was living there.
Yeah, Jesse was living there at the time.
I did when I was in law school. I did a semester at the University College Cork.
Really?
So I was in Cork, Ireland for 4 months. Yeah, that was a blast.
Yeah, so we went to Dublin. That was a good trip. I'm trying to think of, because we didn't really we did little trips here and there as a kid. Like we rented in York too, actually. So we would do stuff like that. I went on every history trip you could ever imagine because my brother was, where you want to go in 4th grade as a girl is Gettysburg. Yeah. Jesse would be like, oh my gosh, this is where Pickett's Charge was. Can you see it? Now, granted, backstory, I taught history for a while too, so I do love history, but I was 4th grade. I was like, Mom, count my cartwheels. Like, that's that's my Gettysburg memory. And Jesse being like, can you imagine this? And I was like, count louder.
So this won't play for those outside of New Hampshire, but did you ever have school trips to Heritage, New Hampshire?
I did.
Yeah,
Yep.
I used to do that, and I remember Storyland would be right next door
Yes,
to it.
yep.
So we'd be unloading off this bus to go to this museum
Right.
with a bunch of 4th graders and seeing all these rides right next
Yep.
door. And we're like, why aren't we going on the rides? Why are we going through this dusty old museum?
Yeah. Or like Cooperstown with my brother.
Okay, no, that's...
No,
I went to Cooperstown. And that was-
It's when you're like, again, 4th grade, my brother, and
Baseball's the best.
if you want to go to a museum, just know if you're going with Jesse, you're going to be there all day, like 10 hours, because he reads every one of those little things that some of us just walk by. So I was...
That's guilty as charged.
He reads, which is good, he's smart. So,
How dare you?
It was painful when I like baseball. I don't love baseball. So.
Well, no one's perfect.
Right. Close enough.
Maybe I should just time out here. Are we all Red Sox fans? How are
Big
we
time.
doing
Yeah.
here? Okay.
Yeah, you're safe.
Are we all right?
Yeah,
All
that's a
right?
safe
We're
place.
okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
A safe house, safe
Yes.
place? Okay.
Yes.
It's probably not. It's not going to be true of the listening population all the way around. But all right. So at the table, there's going to be peace and harmony for at least, Let's see. Is there anything that perhaps your listeners would be surprised to know about you?
Want to go? But they can tell stories, I'm sure.
Well, about Jesse, I could tell many, but I mean, this is family friendly. No, I'm just kidding. When I was thinking of things that I could joke people don't know about Jesse is, you go get ice cream. You could just eat it. Like you and I can just eat ice cream. Jesse, be ready to sit there for an hour because he's got to wait for it to melt. Soup it up. But no, we don't get milkshakes because that would make too much sense to get a milkshake that's already melted. We got to soup up our ice cream. So let it melt and then stir till it's not like frozen anymore, till it's like a milkshake liquid. Then we can eat it. So when we, as a kid, you'd get like dessert. Like Jesse would be eating dessert 10 hours after everybody else.
I actually relate to that. On a personal level, I enjoy soft serve. But hard ice cream, I wait for it to get like kind of soupy. No, I wouldn't say milkshake level, but I want to be able to like scoop.
Is this a French Canadian thing?
Very easily.
Or a male thing. I'm putting some rainbow jimmies on it.
Right in
I'm good to go.
Like when I take ice cream out of the fridge, I put it in the microwave for 10 seconds.
Hell microwave is.
Sometimes, sure.
Yeah.
Is that like a...
I don't know.
How did they learn
how that happened. I have no idea, but I've always done it.
He's always done it.
I've done it forever. Yeah. True.
And
I still do it. I can't deny that.
I still do it. I'm lactose intolerant, so it's the Ben and Jerry's non-dairy one, but I'll still nuke it.
No, I guess so.
I don't want to hammer and chisel to.
But then as a kid, so I'm 4 years younger, it'd be so frustrating because I'd be done my ice cream and there's Jesse still eating it, and I'd be bitter.
I would be too. I'm bitter right now, Jesse. I'm sorry.
That's true.
Yeah.
Any other mysteries or like something weird or
Just say MF.
You could tell people, yeah.
That's probably the biggest one, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the real answer to the question. It's a less fun answer than eating ice cream. But
True.
I think the biggest thing that impacts my life that our listeners have no idea about is I have multiple sclerosis. So that's something that, again, I don't get into very often, but I mean, that's a day-to-day basis thing. So something something I've had for 13 years now.
Yep.
But yeah, so that's probably the correct answer. That's
true.
Biggest thing in my life that a lot of people don't know about.
People don't realize, especially not seeing potentially the day-to-day effects.
Yeah, that's right.
And is that something, just out of curiosity,
Sure.
and you don't need to share it if you don't want to, is there a family history of that?
Not at all.
Do you know?
No.
Well, not true.
Not that I knew of, anyway.
No, yeah, we didn't know ahead of time, so it was one of those things that, we didn't know. Jesse was diagnosed my senior year of college. We thought at first it was just that he was having some back issues, that he had slipped a disc. So when he was diagnosed, we later then found out my dad's got a cousin and my mom's got a cousin. So it is something, and then I don't even know if he knows that I'm still, I'm a part of Brigham and Women's does a genetic thing that I'm still a part of to this day forever, that I send in stuff for, just to test, And it's something I had thought about because of Jesse. It was something I even talked to him. For sure, yeah, it actually does run in the family, Jesse.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so, yeah. But it does, it's definitely impacted his life for sure, in ways that he never thought, but...
When you two, can you tell us the origin of the podcast?
Sure.
A little bit more about how, or even how you two know each other, or
This is gonna be fun.
if we can. Maybe how you two know each other, how you get interested in podcasting, and sort of like the background before we talk about maybe the future of the podcast.
Basically, Mike and I know each other through professional wrestling, of course, because how else would two gentlemen meet each other?
Yeah, a friend of a friend, and was like, oh, hey, you like wrestling? Oh, I have a couple friends that like wrestling. Do you guys watch the pay-per-views once a month, every Sunday, spend $60? Hey, maybe we can get all together and share the hit.
That's exactly what happened.
And that's exactly what happened.
So it wasn't like the historical museum reading captions.
Oh,
okay.
no.
All right.
No, it was.
We watched wrestling pay-per-views together. It's how we met.
Once a month.
All right, so give me that segue from watching wrestling to let's do a French-Canadian Legacy podcast, because that's
Yeah.
I got involved with the Franco-American Center in Manchester. I was very fortunate to do so. Basically, I was just venting at the water cooler one day with one of my coworkers about how I didn't think the French Canadians did enough to really tell their story, at least in Manchester. So he's like, time out, you got to talk to my brother. So the guy I was talking to, his name is Dan Beaulieu. His brother's Tim Beaulieu. Tim's the guy who puts on Poutine Fest. He got me into the Franco-American Center. And while I was there, at least the way I'm wired for sure, is just like, well, what can I bring to the table for this organization to try to help this cause? And I had done college radio. I'd done sports broadcasting. I called basketball games. I called AA baseball games for the Bowie Baysox. That was way fun. So I had done some radio in the past, but I had zero idea at all how to pull off a podcast. None. No clue. I have zero technical skills.
Oh.
Mike will be the first to tell you that for sure. So
we can't trust you with the toaster? Or like,
No.
not even...
Or like a GPS on the way up. Jesse just realized how GPSs work on phones. Literally on this drive up from Manchester to Maine today. So
Wow. He found out you can get real-time traffic updates from the GPS, and he's like, they can do that?
This is
Yeah.
awesome. Thanks, guys. But yeah, so I knew I needed help. I went to some people at the Franco-American Center first and tried to sell them on doing it with me. I tried to sell it to two other guys with the idea was we'd go every third week. So we'd take turns hosting and kind of do it that way. But they're like, hey, this is a tremendous idea, but no, this is going to involve a ton of time. And I'm like, yes, I understand that. They're like, well, we have families, we can't do it. So I'm thinking, like, who can I trust, who I know can I depend on that can handle that kind of handling the technical side. So I got Mike to see if he was interested.
We had actually talked about doing a wrestling podcast.
We had talked
in
a
the
lot of
past
things,
with our group of friends.
But
And
because Mike runs everything. He runs obviously he does all the production, editing for the show, but he also handles all social media. I have nothing to do with any of this. So if you see a post that you like on Facebook, trust me, that is not me who posted that. That's a guarantee.
I talked to Jesse. I don't know. Like Jesse always says, I think he does the hardest part, talking to people. I think that's insane, the amount of work he puts into getting all these great interviews. I just click some buttons on a computer and edit out when we make a mistake. But it's all 100%. It was Jesse. He asked me about it because I have a background. I have an associate's in television production. I went to college for television production. Then I switched to English and philosophy halfway through. You know,
As people do. Yeah.
where the big bucks are.
Right. Hey, you're talking history majors.
But I had been wanting to get back into editing. And Jesse knew that, and he asked me if I wanted to be involved in a podcast. And that's actually when Patrick mentioned the Home Road. I reached out to Tonya because I'm really interested in movies and how they're made and stuff. So
well, it is a great. I mean, you're a great team, obviously, and as I said in prior episodes. It's just amazing that you're doing this, and I do know how much work it is, and have an understanding for what goes into it. And I mean, it's websites, it's the social media, it's the editing, it is the interviewing, but it's the caring. And you two have done such a beautiful job.
Well, thank you. I think we benefit substantially by both of us being absolutely positive the other one has the hard job. and I think that's
it's really Bryce.
Bryce,
man.
Bryce is carrying.
He carries.
Yeah.
But no, thank you because we've been very fortunate. We do put a ton of time into it, so it is good that we've been able to produce as many already as we have.
And we're learning so much every week. Surprisingly,
sure.
Something new pops up. But
yeah.
And thanks for listening, and hope it sounds all right.
It sounds great. Well, and I don't want to cut you off if you want to keep rolling on that track, but like as far as either what, things that you felt like, wow, yeah, that was good, or something along the way that's made you go, or yeah, or looking forward or future, however you want to jive into that.
We can do. I mean, you want to start? Or I start? No,
You can start.
The coolest story I've heard. There's a couple things that had happened that were way, way cool. Super surprising. I thought we might be able to catch people's attention in New England to tell the New England story. I'm way surprised by how many people we've been able to connect with north of the border. I think it's really cool. A lot of people from Quebec they have no idea what happened to those cousins who came down to New England. And so they're catching some of this story for the first time. So a couple things that happened. The first probably 2 months after we started, somebody from the Franco-American Center actually went to Quebec City, and they were taking a tour of an observatory up there, which I think is kind of fun. And the tour guide, when heard her speaking or whatever, asked where she was from. She said she was from New Hampshire, and the tour guide asked if she listened to our podcast. So this tour guide from Quebec City knew who I was, and that was absolutely awesome. So that was very neat. And then Mike and I, a couple weeks ago now, I guess it'll be months, but as of this recording, got a couple of listeners come down from Drummondville, Quebec. So that was amazing because they're engaged with this story. They find it fascinating that there's this group of people in New Hampshire hanging on to the heritage, fighting to keep the language, to teach the language, and they got a giant kick out of that. I mean, they're younger than us, and they're two young kids. But so they came down, spent a weekend in Manchester, and that was, I mean, to me, that's awesome. To be able to have that connection with people in Quebec is a giant highlight for me. When I first started, I'm not a super creative guy to begin with. I'm pretty analytical. I approach things. Me and Mike we would approach interviews differently because I'm very much like a history guy. I'm got a law degree. I got a law background, so that's very much how I A, B, C, and D in order type person. So this podcast, I've interviewed a couple of poets, which is something I never thought I would do. Obviously, I interviewed somebody who made a movie, which is so crazy. I interviewed somebody who wrote a play. These are things, a novel. We just spoke to about a novel. I thought for sure when I first had this idea that basically I would be telling a history story. And I'm finding I'm telling a lot more than just a history story. And that to me is very cool and unexpected. It's absolutely taken me, I've read more poetry in the past 3 months than I have my entire life prior to doing some of these interviews. And it's been fascinating. I've loved all of it.
And again, echoing, every time someone reaches out, we get just random emails from people. I stumbled across it. I want to learn more about my ancestry because of listening to you. And it's just insane that people actually listen. I'm surprised because I don't know. When you're working on the project, you're like, this is cool for us? Will it hit other people? And it's amazing that it does, and we thank everyone that drops us a comment on Facebook or Twitter, and we love hearing from you.
For sure.
Okay, so now on to second interview. This one is way fun for me. I had the opportunity to sit down in Mike's basement, of course, with my parents. Now, I talk a ton about my parents on this show. Obviously, a super huge influence on what I have done here. And for the first time, I got to chat with them a little bit about some of the topics that I discuss all the time here. So, the second interview, myself and my mom, Pauline Martineau, formerly of Provencher, and my dad, Ben Martineau. So, here's the interview.
So, do you have how would your parents have, met each other?
They were introduced by a mutual friend. My dad was 39 at the time when we married, but I don't know how long they courted before he was married. But
sure.
My dad was 39 when he was married, and my mom was, I think she's 7 years younger.
Wow. Okay.
No, 13 and 19, 6 years younger. So she was 33 at the time.
Gotcha.
And
that seems pretty later than normal.
Later than life. Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. My dad was not what anybody would these days call a player. So I don't think there was a lot of women in his life and stuff before he married.
That's funny. No, that's cool. So did your mom grow up in Lowell? Is that what happened?
No, my mom grew up in Manchester, and then she went to St. Teresa's for grammar school. They had a grammar school. Then the girls' high school at the time for Catholic French girls was St. George, the parish that we grew up. They had a high school for girls, and she went there. And then after graduation, she worked for the ACA, Association Canado-Americaine, which was considered a prestigious job at the time, even though she was making like $6 a week or something like that. But to work for the ACA was supposed to be quite a deal, and it was very much a social group at the time. I mean, they had their basement of their offices had a bowling alley and stuff like that.
That's
and
awesome.
It was more of a social group than, I don't even know if it exists still now, but what it turned into.
That's funny. Now, yeah, I think
it was an insurance group lately.
Yeah. The ACA semi-morphed into what the Franco-American Center is. I think a lot of the resources ended up in the Franco-American Center. The assets is the word I was looking for. But I think the building is now like a Baptist church or something, or something like that. Oh, that's pretty funny. That's cool. So What did your mom? First of all, do you know how far she got in school?
My mom was a high school graduate.
High school graduate.
Yes, and then she started working afterwards. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. Is that she just worked for the ACA for?
I think she worked for an insurance company initially, besides not the ACA. Then when the ACA opened up, she went there, and then post marriage and children, she was a housewife for a while, and then she worked at the JFK Coliseum for a while, like taking tickets at the at the door.
That's awesome.
And then she worked at the Elliott Hospital for, I would say, maybe 15 years or so at the front desk, which you really liked.
Yeah. The people that you see right when you walk in, you
right.
got to find out where you're going.
Going, exactly right. Yeah.
Which was awesome because your mom is a major schmoozer of the highest order. So that's fun. That's cool. Now, where did your folks meet, Ma?
My folks met in the mills.
All right.
My mom and dad were both working at Wambeck Mill at the time. And my mom married at 19.
19?
19. My dad was 24.
Wow.
Yeah. She never got beyond 8th grade because they wanted to send her to an all-girl high school, and she wanted no part of that. She wanted to go to West, and her parents wouldn't let her go. So she said, well, then I'm going to work.
There you go.
So she went into the mills. That's where she met my dad. My dad did 2 years of high school, then joined the Navy
Gotcha.
at 17 and during World War II.
No.
Only because of his French, which is really cool. This is a really cool story.
I like it, yeah.
My father got to travel around with some of the admirals when he was in France because he could translate for the admirals. And I remember my mom telling me once that because he was traveling with the admirals, they took him places where my father became a man.
That's awesome.
It's my favorite story from my mother.
Which is very funny.
Yeah.
If you knew your dad was not.
No, my
that
dad
kind
was
of
just
guy.
very quiet,
Very proper.
Yes.
Wore a tie every day type guy.
Yeah. Yes. So he was. And then when he came back, he met my mom in the mills, and they married. And like a lot of French families, they bought a house with Pepe and Meme living downstairs, and Monique and Maton living right next door. And it takes a village. And
yeah. No, I think that's So you guys both then grew up in the same house with grandparents.
Yes.
Yes.
Because your dad's would have been next door, yours would have been underneath you.
Underneath, correct.
No, that's cool.
No, my mom's was next door.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, your mom's folks were next door, and it would have been your dad's folks that
Correct.
were downstairs.
Correct.
Yeah, that's cool. Now, and your dad was, dad's dad was also in World War II.
Oh, yeah.
You guys
Yes.
both- so you have any of his story from the war? Anything
When
like
we
that?
asked him what he did, he told us he ran.
Ran a lot.
Yeah, that's basically all he would say. He was not one for relating war stories.
Gotcha. But he was in the army.
He was in the army, correct? Yes. Yeah.
No, that's awesome.
He was like a heavy machine gun operator or something like that.
I know because I have the jacket. He has the engineer's pin. I know that. Yeah, I don't. We
And
have
he
no idea what he did.
landed in Normandy the second day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's pretty awesome. That's pretty wild. Okay, do you have any idea what your moms did during the war?
My mom was living at home with her parents, and they must have been
Gotcha.
doing like the
You had nothing.
the
Yeah.
collecting stuff, whatever,
Gotcha.
and the rationing of stuff,
Sure.
etc.
Your mom's mom must have still been pretty young. I would think then.
Yeah, my mom was still at home and probably
Gotcha.
might be still in school. She was
Got it.
still in school.
Got it.
Yeah.
Now, Dad, your dad never did the mill thing.
No, he did not. My dad, after serving, he went to a jeweler's school, in Boston. He used to commute by train from Manchester to Boston every day, and did learn watch repairing and ring sizing and that trade.
Sure. Now, we mentioned the mills a couple times. Ma, do you know what job did your folks do? You mentioned they met at the mills. What did they do at the mills?
My dad was a loom fixer, and he loved his job. It was a skill. It was a skilled position. He had to go to school to learn it, and he was very good. In fact, he was a spare fixer, which meant he didn't have his own set. He got the most difficult breakdowns, and he just loved the whole idea of figuring out what was wrong and how you fix it. My mother also had a skilled position. She was a smash piecer. That's a position where if there's a lot of threads broken, like hundreds of threads broken, my mother had to learn how to get that loom going again. I was a battery hand for a while, and then I graduated to weaver. That's when the threads break and you fix it and you get the loom started again. Battery hand, you just fill the batteries. That a battery is not like you think, like you put in a flashlight.
Right.
A battery is the part of the loom that holds all the bobbins with the thread on it. So it was great. I did it in high school. The whole place was high school kids. We had a great time. They paid well.
I mean, how long did the mills, I guess, survive in Manchester for, like you said, you did it in high school. Like when you were out of college, were the mills still a thing? Or?
Yeah, because they used to hire me back every vacation.
Gotcha.
I would go back to the mills and work. They were great. Worked in the summer. They taught me how to sand the floors, and so I could earn extra money. But they pretty much I worked at Chicopee, which was bought out by Carroll Cable after a while, and then Wambeck, where my mom and dad met, closed a little after that because when I came back from college, I was teaching at Trinity High School, and the mill closed at that point, and my father became a maintenance man at Trinity at that time.
No, and one thing we hear about the conditions working in these mills. I mean, you said about coming back during the summer. You always hear how they were like 100 million degrees and stupid loud. Is that absolutely the reality that you grew up with? Yeah.
Absolutely. We invented the wet shirt contest. 11 o'clock at night when we left those mills, we were soaked.
I believe it. But yet you still like the job, which I think is kind of wild.
Well, I think a lot of jobs, even today we talk about that, a lot of jobs depend on who you're working with.
Sure.
And we had a lot of young kids, and we had a good time. And it paid great. And my best friend was a spinner upstairs. So there was a lot of us working in that mill.
A lot of Frenchies.
A lot of Frenchies.
Were your bosses Frenchies?
They were, but as I was leaving, it was mostly people from Colombia who are now immigrating up into the city, because a lot of the people that I trained before I left were from Colombia. And being French, I was able to speak to them. Like we could almost translate each other because they were Spanish, and a lot of the words kind of matched, and we could understand each other.
That's funny.
It was great.
Did you guys both speak French with your parents when you were in the house?
All the time. My father wouldn't speak English in the house. He was determined to he believed in saving the language, so he would only speak French in the house.
Gotcha.
When we started hanging in the neighborhood, I mean, our parents might speak in French, but we, for the most part, we would answer in English.
You would answer back in English?
Yes.
Gotcha. So there was never a time, or even when you were really little, would you talk to your older sister in French? Or would you guys always talk in English?
We always talked in English among the siblings, yeah.
Gotcha. How about you in your house, Mom?
No, we talked French pretty much. Well, just when Jesse was very young, when Jesse was 18 months old, and I brought him back to New Hampshire for 6 months while my husband was spending the last 6 months in the Army, my father refused to speak to Jesse in English, and Jesse was pretty much fluent in French by the time we left the house. It's kind of cool.
That is very cool. Now I gotta go back to Quebec to get it back.
That's right.
One thing that we've talked about a bunch, obviously, on this show, and I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on this one. My sister and I do not speak French. Monique and I do not. And we are very much not alone. Even though there were many, many, many generations who lived in Manchester, New England in general, speaking French in the house, my generation, me and my sis, was the first that did not. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it came to... When it became time for like me and my sister, we became part of the first generation that did not grow up speaking French in the house. What do you think contributed to that, if you have an idea at all? Because I think it's probably super complicated, but
it's very complicated. But I think the minute that we left the house, for example, when we went off to college, we never spoke French anymore. And when you come back, you start to lose your French. Although my father, to the day he passed, only spoke French in the house, but my mom spoke English, and I think once the generations leave that environment, and you're moving into an environment where nobody is speaking French, I think that's what happens. And you guys were the next generation, so we never spoke French to you. My father did.
Sure.
Spoke French to you, Jesse. But other than that, I think once you start leaving that environment, you lose the language.
I mean, once we started making contact out of the household and all, it was always English, and it just became easier to speak English because, I mean, to this day, like, we said earlier, Pauline and I, our ears are still good as far as understanding people talking to us.
Sure.
But as far as, I struggle when I try to get words for lack of speaking and all.
Sure.
And it just became easier and I guess a bit lazier, basically, just to stay with English.
It is kind of funny because it did this, like, literally over 100 years of people growing up in New England always just generation after generation speaking French, and then it happened. And this is not just in Manchester. This is all through New England. We talked to people in northern New York. Talked to people even in Louisiana. It was all about the same time. All about the same time. Started having fewer and fewer speaking in the house after roughly the same time.
And once you lose those little communities,
sure,
like the little like the French on the west side, once you start losing those communities, you start losing like the second circle of language from the family to the outside world, where you get French newspaper and you get your French radio station. When you start losing that, then it really starts to go.
I guess that makes sense. There comes a point where there's no advantage to really needing it anymore.
Correct.
It's not like you need to go talk to the guy who's at the bakery down the road anymore, right?
And for example, when we were in grammar school, I think it was in 4th grade, we had our first English mass at church. And I mean, up to that point, no such thing. And then
Right.
it was 1, and then it was 2, and then French became not the
one
norm
mass.
anymore. Yeah, the 1 mass a day instead of the constant masses and stuff. And it was just everywhere as we were growing up.
What did your folks think of that when all of a sudden they're doing mass in English?
Well,
Did they care?
both our parents morphed into St. Joe's, which is an Irish Catholic parish,
Sure.
because ours closed and stuff. And for the most part, they were treated well. My mom had been not around that long because she passed, but my dad was very much like the priest there and stuff. But it was different. And my mother at her funeral insisted that some of it be in French and all.
Yeah, our
And
father for sure. I
Yeah.
remember. Yeah, but they weren't like mad about the fact that all of a sudden St. George was now offering English masses. They weren't fired up about
no,
that kind of thing.
no, they were not. No, I think they were really kind of sad when it closed. And,
Sure.
because they lost their, where they had grown up and where our family had grown up. They
Right.
lost that center.
Sure.
I think they understood that if the church was going to continue, it had to change.
Sure.
Because French Canadian families weren't the dominant group anymore. So if the church was going to be viable, it had to accommodate a bigger population. But we only went to French mass.
You only went to you
Only
guys
went to the
you
8:30
guys-
mass on
You guys
Sunday.
weren't going to show up at any English masses.
No.
Save for you to.
I think my mother, for going to church, it was the time of the mass was more important than
She didn't
the
care about the
language.
language. Yeah. Because another thing we hear a lot of times, both in Quebec prior to the Quiet Revolution and then even the Franco-Americans here in New England, was the whole idea that the church and the priests had influence on parishioners well beyond just what you would think of a normal priest role. It was like, obviously they had, they ran the church, but they also had influence when it came to, how they would raise their families and how they would even spend their money or what jobs they ended up taking or who they should vote for or who they should even date, all that kind of stuff. Was that still present in Manchester, or did you hear about stories of that in Manchester from, like, your folks at all? Or?
I mean, we even had some of the vestiges of it when we were a little older, because Pauline and I went to counseling at our church prior to getting married and all, and
Sure.
and got the traditional questions, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I mean, and we were 25 and 26 at the time, so we weren't kids, but that was still necessary to get a church wedding. We had to go through that process. So they were still not as active as when we were younger, but they still
Gotcha.
had a big influence on how things were done and when they were done and where they were done.
It's funny because you just hear the stories of like before even changing jobs, people would go and ask their priest first, or want to make sure that.
Yeah, I don't think that it was that involved at that point.
No.
Gotcha.
But I can relate one story. My dad got a permanent disability in World War II,
Yeah.
and he always felt self-conscious about it, even though it wasn't a lot of money and stuff. And so he had told a priest, whose name I don't remember, at confession about it and stuff. And the guy told him to make reimbursements to the government for that money if he felt so guilty about it. And my mom basically said, tell that guy to go somewhere, because
Yeah.
he had no idea, being a priest and being coddled his whole life, what exactly that meant to our family.
Isn't that crazy? A priest telling your dad to give back his disability money from World War II.
Yes.
That's so nuts. The very first interview we ever recorded for the podcast, not the first one we aired, the very first one we recorded was with Juliana LaRue, and we talked about her blog post, which was all about what we call ourselves. And so far in this podcast, we've heard a lot of various answers. The most common is people use the term Franco-American, but some have said French-Canadian. I've heard French-Canadian-American. I've heard somebody told us we should use Quebecois-American. Some said just simply call yourself French. What did you guys refer to yourself as growing up? Well, what would your folks have used? I'm curious.
I think they would have said French Canadian
Yeah.
if they asked.
Yes.
If they were asked.
Yeah,
So-
I think my folks too would have referred to themselves as French Canadians.
Gotcha. You wouldn't have Franco-American. Because I never heard Franco-American.
No.
That's spaghetti.
Right? That is, yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, there was a French Franco-American spaghetti. So. All right, so final question, and turned this. I've mentioned her a couple times, so I offered the very final question to my amazing sister Monique, and her suggestion for the final question was: is there something from the French culture you had growing up that you wish was still around, would come back? If there's anything that you can recall from that time that you kind of wish was still around for future generations, what would that be?
Oh my.
I think one thing is and I'm largely negligent in this area myself, is the extended family thing. I mean, my mother knew her like fourth or fifth cousins up in Canada and all, and like, they were active members of the family. Would go see them, and same thing with my dad's side. I mean, the sense of family was a lot more extensive and all and inclusive, and we just haven't done it in my family, and I'll speak to that. And my sister and my brother are a lot better about it than I am, and I think it's been at a loss because I mean we all have very really nice cousins and et cetera, and and I kind of lost contact with them, not knowing that I don't know where they are and speak to them on occasion, but they're not as part of the family as they was with my mother's generation growing up, and I think that's a loss.
No, that's cool.
I'd like to keep some of the very tangible things. Food. I mean, I really believe that's really primal, and it brings you back. I teach junior high, and one of the questions I always ask at Christmas is, tell me something cultural your family is going to have over the holidays. And they all talk about the different foods.
Sure.
And that just opens the door to some great discussions about family and about culture and about language and, pork pie, gâteau, and all that stuff.
That's awesome. All right, well, that's all I got. Thank you, guys.
Now our fathers look at us and sigh with despair, to think that everything they love we simply do not share. But the spirit never dies, our culture will survive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive. Each of us must choose how much to keep alive.
Special thanks to Josie Vachon for providing the music. You can find more about her at josievachon.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Mike Campbell. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at fclpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at FCL Podcast for more information about the topics discussed. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this episode.